My memories of Mannheim, Germany was a good time with my brothers and my family, my cousins. I don't really know how many Jews Mannheim had, but there were 3 different synagogues, and there was a good-sized community there. My father had a business of his own, together with my uncle. And there are a lot of Jews there who had businesses and who were bankers and who had very good careers going for them. I went to a public school, and we had to leave that and go to a strictly Jewish school, which again didn't bother me because I was surrounded by people I knew, and my education continued as it always did. I was, I think about 8 years old when I first encountered any kind of anti-Semitism, when some children threw rocks at me on the street and called me a dirty Jew. My parents at that time recognized that things weren't going the way they should be to have a future in Germany, so that the older of my 2 brothers left in 1936 for America to establish himself, and the younger of the 2, who was at that time 16, he left the following year in 1937, and then in 1938 my parents and I left. But I think that was the conversation of most Jewish families at that time, that something was happening. I think the major impetus that made people leave was that they could no longer hold jobs. There was no employment for Jews. My father couldn't conduct his business any longer because non-Jews would not do business with him. The most difficult part of it was leaving friends behind. And that, to me, was the hardest. We were fortunate enough we had people to sponsor us. There was family in America. I'm sure you know that you had to have a sponsor to enable you to leave the country. So that was a determining factor. We were able to bring most of our furniture out, and I imagine you've heard about the lifts. There were big crates that everybody packed their furnishings in. And you had to make a decision, and my decision was which of the many dolls to take along and which of the toys I was allowed to take along. My mother's major decision was which kitchen items that she cherished she could pack up, and the furniture. But my brothers kept writing, don't bring a lot of things. Our apartments are going to be small, and so don't bring many things. And knowing that once you arrive in a new country, your money will no longer be there, and that you have to make do with what you have, and your whole life standard of living will have changed. So that was my young years before I left for America. My grandfather lived in Berlin, and the last time we went over there and said goodbye to him, I think that too was traumatic. I don't know whether that 9-year-old child realizes and that you will never see him again, but we'd say goodbye, and it was a big thing. He never did get out. My aunts and uncles never left Berlin. We left from Hamburg, Germany, with a lot of other refugees, and came over and came to America. So I remember seeing the Statue of Liberty, and a big to-do was made over that. But we did not land in Ellis Island, as the generations before had done. We just landed in a dock, and we were reunited with my brothers, which was wonderful. At first, another uncle and aunt who had also come from Mannheim a year before, we stayed with them for a couple of days until we found an apartment. And we moved into a 2-bedroom apartment with a kitchen and a living room and an entrance hall. And my 2 brothers and myself and my parents moved into that apartment. Most German refugees did that. You just had small quarters. And now my parents cut their standard of living considerably. My brothers both went to work, even though my younger brother was 16, and helped support the family. Okay. My father at that time never did work anymore.
Because?
He was already in his middle 50s. And my brothers insisted he should not seek work. Work was hard to find with the influx of so many refugees. And so that my brother said, don't worry, we will take care of the family. And that's what they did. I was 9 years old, but they put me into the 2nd grade. which was demoralizing for me. After all, I was taller and bigger than other kids. But since I did not know the language, they felt it was better for me to start at a lower level. Not being as financially secure as we were in Germany and as well off, my life certainly had changed. My father and mother walked 15 minutes to save a nickel, and we did without. I remember that when we first came to America, I wanted dresses like the other children, because mine were all hand embroidered, hand smocked, beautiful dresses. But once I got into public school, they weren't at all like what the children were. I remember my mother took me downtown to Klein's on 14th Street, which was way downtown, but the dresses were cheaper there. And that's where I got an American dress, my first American dress. Of course, nobody really knew the extent of the Holocaust and what was going on until during the war and even after the war. One aunt survived in Berlin. She had been married to a nice man who was not Jewish, and he hid her the whole time in Berlin. But there were other aunts and uncles, and my mother's other sister and her husband and her brother, who went to work one day and never came back. We've been back a number of times, and my husband always felt drawn to going back to Mannheim. I could have cared less about going back, but I can see where he wanted to visit the cemetery. He wanted to visit the cemetery in Frankfurt where his father was buried. I saw every person there as a Nazi, and I just could not feel comfortable there. To think that, they deprived my father of his livelihood. They broke families where they're in all parts of the world. That's a tragedy. We hope our children don't ever see that. That's why I think we have to give them a strong feeling of identity, that they know who they are.